Think real power in a tech empire belongs to managers in expensive hoodies, throwing around artificial intelligence buzzwords. Make no mistake, ultimate power lies with whoever holds the keys to the legacy systems keeping them alive. Last week, they fired me on a 3-minute video call calling me an old-timer. They forgot that when you unplug a life support system, the machine does not bleed. I needed exactly one phone call to prove it. Hello, amazing listeners of Boss Revenge Stories. We want to sincerely thank you for being here, though we must share the unfortunate news that YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep our operations running. If you find yourself captivated by today's tale, we kindly ask you to support us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel to hear even more incredible, exclusive true stories with longer durations and intricate details we cannot share publicly on YouTube, all brought to life by multiple emotional voice actors. You can easily join us by scanning the QR code displayed on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link located in the video description and pinned comment. Now, let us dive into today's story about a woman named Lucy Rivera. I am 42 years old, serving as a senior cybersecurity engineer at OmniVantage Networks. Most people think cyber warfare looks like a Hollywood movie, complete with flashing red skulls on giant screens and blaring sirens. The truth is far colder. A real attack is absolutely silent. I was halfway through a cold turkey sandwich when the anomaly triggered on my secondary monitor. It was a ransomware strain, and it was beautiful in a terrifyingly malicious way. It had completely bypassed our multi-million-dollar automated cloud defense systems, slipping right through the cracks of the new artificial intelligence protocols everyone in the boardroom was so proud of. Its target was Sentinel Logistics, our most critical client. They were not just moving consumer electronics. Sentinel held highly classified transport contracts for the United States Department of Defense. If this ransomware locked their databases, the supply chain for military bases across the globe would freeze in an instant. The stakes were astronomical, yet the open plan office around me remained a sea of calm, filled with the hum of espresso machines and casual chatter. I did not panic. I pushed my cold sandwich aside, pulled my old heavy physical terminal closer, and went to work. For 15 agonizing minutes, my fingers flew across the keys. While the flashy modern systems were blind to the threat, I manually severed the compromised node connections, built a temporary digital firewall from scratch, and systematically corralled the malicious packets into an isolated sandbox environment. I trapped the virus in a dead-end physical server before it could execute its encryption key. By the time I took my next bite of the turkey sandwich, the crisis was entirely neutralized. The world had just avoided a catastrophic national security breach, and it happened with zero fanfare. My secure phone vibrated on the desk. It was a single encrypted message from the Director of Security over at Sentinel Logistics. It simply read, "Owe you a life, L." I locked the screen and let out a quiet sigh. Around me, the OmniVantage office continued its daily routine. My colleagues, mostly fresh graduates barely out of college, walked past my desk with their iced matcha lattes. They glanced at my 10-year-old mechanical keyboard, the bulky physical servers humming beneath my desk, and the thick bundle of Ethernet cables I refused to let the IT department remove. I could see the pity in their eyes. To them, I was just the tech auntie, a relic from a bygone era stubbornly clinging to outdated hardware, probably doing some mundane data entry or fixing legacy code that no one cared about anymore. They had no idea that the very cables they tripped over were the only things keeping this company from a federal investigation. That was when the air in the room shifted. Enter Bryce Kingston. Bryce was exactly 29 years old, though he carried the unearned confidence of someone who thought he had already conquered the world. He had just been hired as our new vice president of digital transformation and cloud disruption. He wore a designer hoodie that probably cost more than my first car, expensive custom sneakers, and a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. Bryce represented the new direction of OmniVantage, an era of lean operations, outsourced cloud management, and automated algorithms. He stopped by my cubicle, flanked by two nervous-looking project managers. Bryce looked down at my workstation, his nose slightly wrinkled, as if he had just smelled something rotten. He stared at the physical network switches and the heavy-duty routers I maintained for our government-cleared clients. "Lucy, right?" Bryce asked, his tone dripping with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "I was reviewing the floor plan. We really need to get rid of all this physical clutter. The future is wireless. Lucy, everything is moving to the cloud. Having these massive iron boxes under your desk is just archaic. It is holding us back." I looked up at him, my expression completely flat. I wanted to tell him that those archaic iron boxes were the only reason he still had a company to disrupt. I wanted to explain that you cannot put Department of Defense air-gapped data on a public cloud server without committing a federal crime. But I knew his type. Bryce did not care about security. He only cared about optics, cost-cutting, and buzzwords. "These systems are required for our federal compliance, Bryce," I said calmly. He let out a short, patronizing laugh. "We will see about that. The board wants us agile. We cannot let old-timers stand in the way of progress just because they are afraid to learn new tricks." With a dismissive wave of his hand, Bryce walked away, his entourage trailing behind him. He looked at me not as a senior engineer who had just saved his skin, but as a stubborn dinosaur waiting for the meteor to strike. He had no idea what kind of meteor he was about to pull down on his own head. It took exactly 48 hours for the hurricane of corporate incompetence to make landfall. Bryce called a mandatory all-hands meeting in the main glass atrium to announce what he aggressively branded as Operation Apex. The setup looked more like a tech startup launch party than a corporate briefing. He stood on a raised platform beneath a giant projection of a glowing digital brain, speaking through a sleek headset microphone. Operation Apex was his grand, unstoppable vision to forcefully migrate every single physical server we operated onto a fully automated, artificial intelligence-managed cloud network within 60 days. He paced the stage, throwing around empty phrases like synergistic scalability, frictionless cloud integration, and disrupting the legacy paradigm. The younger staff, mesmerized by the buzzwords, practically cheered. I stood at the very back of the room with my arms crossed, watching a man confidently promise to build a house out of straw right next to a den of starving wolves. Later that afternoon, I requested a private meeting. I walked into his corner office, a sterile, minimalist glass box completely devoid of personality, save for a few expensive abstract art prints and a motorized standing desk. I did not bother with small talk. I placed a thick, physically printed compliance file on his immaculate desk. "Bryce," I began, keeping my voice perfectly even and professional, "I need you to look at the legal stipulations for the Sentinel Logistics contract before you proceed. We absolutely cannot migrate their databases to a public or even a hybrid cloud system. Federal security laws strictly dictate that their architecture must remain entirely air-gapped. That requires dedicated physical servers, completely isolated from the primary network, with continuous and direct human oversight. If you plug their classified data into an automated cloud environment, we instantly violate a Department of Defense mandate. It is not a suggestion. It is federal law." Bryce leaned back in his ergonomic mesh chair, steepled his fingers together, and gave me a smile so incredibly condescending it could have frozen boiling water. "Lucy, Lucy, Lucy," he sighed, shaking his head as if he were speaking to a confused toddler. "You are completely missing the big picture here. We are entering the era of artificial intelligence. Human oversight is exactly the kind of inefficient bottleneck we are trying to eliminate. Sentinel Logistics will be absolutely thrilled when we show them how much faster and leaner their data retrieval becomes under the new algorithm." "They will not be thrilled," I corrected him without raising my voice. "They will send federal agents to shut this entire building down." His patronizing smile vanished instantly, replaced by an irritated, arrogant sneer. "You know what your real problem is. You are an old-timer. You are terrified of the future. You are clinging to these obsolete dinosaur processes because you know deep down that artificial intelligence can do your job in a fraction of a second. Operation Apex is happening across the board. You need to get on board with the new culture, or get out of the way of progress. He did not just stop at verbal insults. Over the next 2 weeks, a quiet and systematic humiliation campaign began. I started receiving automated email notifications informing me that my administrative privileges were being stripped away one by one. My highest tier access to the central firewalls was suddenly downgraded. Furthermore, Bryce completely sidelined my entire team of elite cybersecurity specialists, instead of monitoring network traffic or patching zero-day vulnerabilities. My top-tier engineers were forced into mandatory, 4-hour afternoon workshops on user experience mindset orientation and empathetic design thinking. I watched brilliant men and women who could dismantle a state-sponsored cyber attack blindfolded, being forced to draw their feelings on sticky notes with colorful markers, while a life coach talked about synergy. I did not argue. I did not send angry emails. I did not throw a tantrum in the break room. In the high-stakes world of cybersecurity, making noise just makes you an easy target. Silence, on the other hand, makes you invisible. While Bryce was busy parading around the office patting himself on the back, I quietly opened an encrypted, localized drive on my terminal. I spent hours meticulously backing up every single system audit log from the past 5 years. More importantly, I saved time-stamped, digitally signed copies of every single warning email I had sent to Bryce and the executive board regarding the federal compliance violations. Then, I pulled up the digital copy of my personal federal security clearance. This was the one crucial detail Bryce was far too arrogant to research. The federal clearance required to handle the Sentinel logistics data was not a blanket permit granted to OmniVantage Networks as a corporation. It was a Level 5 credential granted personally to me as the designated supervising engineer. The moment I was no longer in direct control of those physical servers, that clearance became null and void for the entire company. I read every single line of the statute, ensuring my legal shield was completely impenetrable. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, as I was finishing a silent backup of my personal files, Marcus, a brilliant 22-year-old intern I had mentored, walked past my desk. He dropped a folded piece of paper next to my keyboard before quickly walking away, keeping his head down. I unfolded it. It was a printed snippet of an internal executive memo Marcus had accidentally intercepted. The memo outlined Bryce's secondary objective for Operation Apex. He was currently drafting a massive company-wide layoff list, targeting what he called bloated and redundant legacy personnel. His master plan was to fire the senior engineering staff to free up millions of dollars in the budget, which he would then use to hire trendy, outsourced software vendors. I was sitting at the very top of that termination list. I calmly shredded the piece of paper, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, calculated anticipation. Friday afternoons are universally recognized as the golden hours for corporate cowards. It is the exact moment when executives know they can ruin your livelihood and immediately escape into the weekend, leaving you entirely isolated with the fallout. At exactly 4:30 in the afternoon, a calendar notification materialized on my screen. It was an invitation for a 10-minute video conference with Bryce and a human resources representative named Sarah. There was no subject line. There was no agenda attached. In my line of work, a sudden Friday afternoon meeting with human resources means only one thing: the executioner had arrived. I clicked the join link. Sarah appeared on screen looking incredibly tense, her eyes darting nervously off camera, completely avoiding my gaze. Bryce, however, sat perfectly upright, practically glowing in his expensive ergonomic chair. He did not even bother to look at my digital window. His eyes were mechanically scanning a pre-written script displayed on an adjacent monitor. He cleared his throat with a performative air of authority. "Lucy," Bryce began, his voice completely devoid of human empathy. "As OmniVantage pivots toward a leaner, significantly more agile framework, we are conducting a comprehensive audit of our legacy departments. We have concluded that your current role is no longer essential, effective immediately. Your position is being sunsetted. Your skill set simply no longer aligns with our strategic vision for breakthrough velocity and cloud-native scalability." Sunsetting. It was such a beautiful, poetic word carefully chosen by corporate lawyers to disguise an incredibly ugly betrayal. I did not shed a single tear. I did not shift my weight in my chair. I did not demand an explanation or list the countless times I had saved their entire infrastructure from collapse. I simply stared at the high-definition feed of Bryce's smug, punchable face. The silence in the virtual room stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. Sarah began to squirm visibly, the heavy tension radiating through her webcam. Finally, I leaned slightly closer to my camera lens. I looked right into the glowing green indicator light, ensuring my digital eye contact was absolute. "Bryce," I said, keeping my voice stripped of all emotion, cold and steady as winter ice. "Are you absolutely certain you want to sever my Tier 1 oversight access right this second?" Bryce offered a self-satisfied, arrogant nod. "We have the situation completely under control. Lucy, we are flipping the switch to the fully autonomous artificial intelligence network this weekend. Human Resources will forward your severance package and Cobra insurance details to your personal email address." He raised his hand to click the end call button, but he did not even get the chance. Before his finger could strike the mouse, my screen went entirely black. The virtual private network connection dropped abruptly. The encrypted portal locked me out. They had killed my administrative access while the meeting was still technically active. I was officially in exile. The transition from a vital asset to a ghost was perfectly seamless. I stood up in the quiet hum of the fading afternoon office. I found a single, small cardboard box near the supply closet. I did not have much to take. Having never bothered to decorate my workspace with useless trinkets, I gently placed my 3 worn leather notebooks inside. Next went a ceramic mug printed with the goofy face of my old golden retriever. Finally, I packed a framed photograph of my classic 1969 Mustang. That was my entire legacy in this building, reduced to roughly 3 pounds of personal effects. I walked down the long central aisle, holding the cardboard box firmly against my chest. A few younger developers glanced up from their keyboards, their faces registering a fleeting moment of confusion before they immediately looked back down at their dual monitors, terrified of catching the sudden unemployment disease. The heavy glass doors of the towering OmniVantage lobby slid open with a soft hiss, welcoming the warm evening air. I stepped out onto the concrete pavement. I did not stop. I did not turn around. I did not look up at the gleaming corporate logo etched into the glass facade. The building was already dead to me. Hours later, the world had gone perfectly still. I sat in my darkened home garage, the only illumination coming from the faint amber glow of the street lamp filtering through the dusty windows. The heavy scent of motor oil and aged leather radiating from my Mustang grounded me, washing away the sterile stench of the corporate office. I sank deeply into an old, creaky workbench chair. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy, deeply encrypted personal phone. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh bluish light across my face in the shadows. I rapidly bypassed the biometric locks and opened my hidden contact list. I scrolled past the mundane numbers, down to a highly secured partition. My thumb hovered precisely over a single contact entry, saved simply as Viper 1. I pressed the call button. Viper 1 was not a standard corporate contact saved in a digital Rolodex. His real name was General Vance, a hardened, no-nonsense commanding officer who oversaw the deeply classified, covert logistical operations for Sentinel Logistics. This was a man responsible for moving highly sensitive military assets across volatile global territories. He treated data security with the same lethal seriousness as an active combat zone. The encrypted line rang exactly twice. A sharp, mechanical beep verified my secure connection before his deep, gravelly voice cut through the static. He did not offer a polite greeting. He demanded my operational clearance code. I provided my unique alphanumeric identifier without a single second of hesitation. "General," I began, my voice perfectly matching his flat, tactical tone. I did not complain about my sudden termination. I did not waste his valuable time whining about toxic office politics. Nor did I utter a single negative word about the arrogant vice president who was currently dismantling their digital infrastructure. I simply delivered the unadulterated, devastating facts. I am no longer employed at OmniVantage Networks. My federal security oversight clearance at that facility is officially invalid as of midnight tonight. The silence on the other end of the encrypted line was absolute. It was not a confused silence. It was the chilling, heavy quiet that immediately precedes a massive tactical strike. I could practically hear the gears turning in the general's highly strategic mind, instantly calculating the catastrophic vulnerabilities now exposing his classified transport routes. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously soft, practically a whisper. Are they actually putting the logistical database on the public cloud? Yes, I replied simply. The call ended with a sharp, definitive click. There was no goodbye. There were no follow-up questions. General Vance had a digital war to wage, and I had just handed him the exact coordinates of his target. I placed the phone down on my workbench, leaned back in the shadows of my garage, and waited for the weekend to pass. Monday morning at the OmniVantage headquarters was a scene pulled straight from a hollow-tech industry fantasy. According to the internal social media feeds, I was quietly monitoring through an anonymous ghost account. The main glass lobby had been transformed into a lavish celebration space. Bryce Kingston had ordered a massive, glaringly bright digital countdown clock to be erected right next to the reception desk, ticking down the final seconds to the official launch of Operation Apex. Waiters dressed in crisp black vests circulated through the crowd of cheering employees, carrying silver trays loaded with expensive crystal flutes of champagne. A trendy disc jockey spun up beat, thumping electronic music in the corner, masking the reality of what they were actually doing. Bryce stood at the dead center of the spectacle, beaming for the corporate photographer, soaking in the manufactured adoration. At exactly 8:59 in the morning, the countdown clock hit 0. Bryce dramatically pressed a comically oversized red button resting on a clear acrylic podium. Confetti rained down from the high ceiling. The automated artificial intelligence cloud network officially went live, instantly sucking up petabytes of data. Bryce took a long sip of his champagne, genuinely believing he had just cemented his legacy as a brilliant, visionary leader. He had no idea he had just detonated a federal landmine right under his own feet. At precisely 9:01 in the morning, the celebration was violently interrupted. Up on the heavily restricted executive floor, the entire legal department's communication system lit up with terrifying urgency. The general counsel practically dropped his morning coffee as the secure servers simultaneously locked down, displaying the heavy seal of the federal government. They did not receive an angry email from a client. They did not receive a polite request for a routine compliance audit. They received a red order. A red order is a highly classified, immediate action directive utilized exclusively by the Department of Defense. It completely bypassed all standard corporate negotiations and arbitration clauses. The directive was brutally clear. Sentinel Logistics was unilaterally terminating their $450 million contract, effective that exact second. The sheer magnitude of Bryce's incompetence was finally laid bare for the frantic legal team to dissect. He had completely ignored the fine print of the government contract. Bryce had arrogantly assumed that OmniVantage Networks, as a massive corporate entity, held the necessary federal compliance to manage and store military data. He was fatally wrong. The federal compliance was not anchored to the building, the company name, or the fancy new cloud servers. It was entirely anchored to my personal federal license. I was the legally mandated human firewall. The moment Bryce clicked that button on Friday afternoon to terminate my employment and sever my virtual private network access, he stripped OmniVantage of its only legal authorization to possess that classified information. By blindly migrating that strictly regulated data to a public cloud environment without my certified oversight, Bryce did not just breach a commercial agreement. He actively transformed a billion-dollar tech firm into a criminal organization violating strict national security laws. He had handed the federal government the ultimate weapon, and they were about to tear his shiny new empire to the ground. The confetti had barely settled on the lobby floor before the absolute devastation hit. Up in the executive suites, the champagne glasses were abandoned on mahogany tables, the bubbles quickly going flat as a heavy, suffocating panic descended. Down in the primary server farm, located 3 states away in a heavily guarded subterranean facility, Bryce's highly anticipated artificial intelligence cloud spun to life. The massive algorithms eagerly reached out to absorb the monumental data streams they had been promised by the executives, but the digital pipelines were completely barren. The cloud grasped at nothing but empty air. Exactly 12 minutes before the grand launch, a convoy of unmarked black tactical vehicles had breached the perimeter of the physical data center. Federal agents, acting under Sentinel Logistics' emergency national security directives, did not bother with digital firewalls, polite requests, or soft shutdowns. They marched directly into the freezing, heavily air-conditioned server rooms, flashed their federal badges at the terrified facility manager, and quite literally ripped the thick power cables straight out of the wall sockets. The physical machines died instantly. The classified data was locked in impenetrable darkness, completely cut off from the shiny new network. The glowing digital brain projected on the lobby wall was starved of its most critical asset, flashing warning codes as the entire system failed to boot. The contagion spread faster than any biological virus ever could. In the cutthroat corporate world, blood in the water attracts apex predators immediately. Sentinel Logistics was the anchor client, the cornerstone of our entire reputation as a secure fortress. When word leaked through encrypted industry channels that a massive defense contractor had violently pulled their data overnight, panic infected the rest of the corporate portfolio. By Tuesday morning, the chaos escalated exponentially. 2 of our largest international financial clients, massive banking conglomerates that handled trillions in daily transactions, slammed on the brakes. They saw the military abandon ship and instantly assumed a catastrophic 0-day vulnerability had been breached. Both banking giants issued immediate cease and desist orders, completely freezing their quarterly payments. Furthermore, they demanded a comprehensive, independent audit of every single line of code in our architecture before they would allow another kilobyte of their financial data to pass through our routers. The dominoes were falling with terrifying speed, crushing the entire revenue stream of the company in a matter of 48 hours. The towering glass walls of the headquarters suddenly felt like a sinking ship. Back in the sterile glass prison of his corner office, the smug arrogance had entirely melted off Bryce Kingston's face. He was sweating profusely, pacing frantically back and forth across his expensive rug, completely abandoning his useless buzzwords for pure, unadulterated terror, desperate to salvage his collapsing empire and his own career. He made the most foolish decision of his entire short-lived tenure. He instructed his terrified assistant to get General Vance on the line. Bryce genuinely believed he could utilize modern metrics, agile roadmaps, and synergistic pie charts to smooth over what he arrogantly assumed was simply a stubborn military man misunderstanding the beauty of digital transformation. He dialed the secure contact number with trembling fingers. The phone rang exactly once. It did not connect to a bustling military logistics command center. Instead, an automated, chillingly polite voice echoed through his speakerphone. The voice informed him that his call had been automatically routed to the Active Cybercrimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and that his voice print was currently being recorded for an ongoing federal inquiry regarding the mishandling of classified intelligence. Bryce dropped the receiver as if the plastic itself were coated in boiling acid, the blood completely draining from his face. The financial markets are utterly ruthless, and they absolutely do not forgive blatant ignorance. By Wednesday afternoon, the rumors had hit the trading floors of Wall Street. The stock ticker for OmniVantage Networks began a violent vertical plunge. Within 3 hours of the opening bell, the company's stock evaporated by an astonishing 30% of its total value. Billions of dollars in market capitalization vanished into the ether, wiping out executive bonuses and shareholder equity alike. The board of directors, a group of furious billionaires who only cared about their profit margins, convened an emergency tribunal. They bypassed Bryce entirely and ordered a brutal internal investigation led by a ruthless third-party forensic team. It took these investigators less than a day to unearth the digital graveyard I had meticulously preserved. They found the securely backed-up audit logs. They found every single warning email I had clearly written regarding the federal legal constraints. Worst of all for the vice president of cloud disruption. They discovered the internal communications where Bryce openly mocked me, called me an old-timer, and explicitly ordered his team to ignore my compliance warnings to speed up his disastrous launch timeline. The smoking gun was not just warm, it was practically glowing radioactive. While the towering glass skyscraper of OmniVantage was burning to the ground in a spectacular inferno of legal and financial ruin, my environment was profoundly peaceful. I was standing in my sunlit kitchen, wearing a comfortable pair of worn-out denim jeans and an oversized flannel shirt. The rich, earthy aroma of freshly ground black coffee filled the air as I slowly poured steaming hot water over the filter. A vintage vinyl record of classic 70s rock was spinning on my turntable in the living room, filling the quiet house with the soulful, grounding sound of a heavy bass line and a wailing electric guitar. Resting on the granite kitchen counter, perfectly aligned with my ceramic coffee mug, was my smartphone. The screen was completely silent, as I had muted all notifications, but it was flashing constantly like a frantic strobe light in a dark club. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of the bitter coffee and glanced at the glowing display. There were exactly 68 missed calls. The notification banner showed a continuous, desperate stream of pleading text messages from the chief executive officer, the head of human resources, and the lead corporate counsel. They were begging me to pick up the phone. They were practically crawling through the digital wires, desperate for the obsolete old-timer to save them from the very future they had tried to shove down my throat. I smiled, a genuine, relaxed expression, turned my back on the flashing screen, and walked into the living room to flip the record to the second side. By Thursday morning, the silence of my suburban street was broken by the low, heavy purr of a massive black chauffeur-driven executive sedan. It rolled slowly up my driveway, looking entirely absurd parked next to my weathered mailbox. I was under the hood of my Mustang, a grease-covered socket wrench in my hand, when I heard the heavy car door slam shut. I did not bother to stand up right away. I let him wait. When I finally wiped the motor oil from my forehead with the back of my wrist and stepped out from the garage shadows, I found the chairman of the board of OmniVantage Network standing awkwardly on my cracked concrete driveway. He was a man used to private jets and corner offices, now shifting his weight uncomfortably in a bespoke Italian suit that probably cost more than my entire garage setup. The expensive scent of his designer cologne violently clashed with the raw, honest smell of gasoline and worn leather. "Lucy," the chairman began, his voice tight, stripped of the usual corporate bravado. He looked exhausted. The deep bags under his eyes told me he had not slept since Monday. "We made a catastrophic error. I am here to personally apologize on behalf of the entire executive board." I leaned against the fender of my car, crossing my arms. An apology from the chairman himself. That must mean the stock price hit the floor. He swallowed hard, refusing to meet my gaze for a second before desperation forced him to look at me. "We need you back. Right now, I am officially offering you the position of Vice President of Engineering. We will multiply your previous salary by 3. You will have absolute, unquestioned autonomy to manage the infrastructure however you see fit. You can bring back all the physical servers you want. Just do it your old-timer way and get Sentinel Logistics back on our grid before the federal authorities dismantle us completely." I picked up an old, frayed shop rag and slowly wiped the grease from my fingers. It was the exact moment I had been waiting for, and it tasted sweeter than any champagne Bryce had popped. "I am afraid that is impossible," I replied, my voice perfectly level. "I do not work for OmniVantage Networks anymore, and I make it a strict personal rule to never clean up another person's garbage as a hired employee." The chairman paled. "Lucy, please, name your price. We are facing federal indictments. I tossed the dirty rag onto my workbench and reached into the passenger seat of my car. I pulled out a crisp, professionally bound legal folder and slid it smoothly across the dusty hood of the Mustang. You cannot hire me because I am already contracted by the very people you lost, I stated, watching his eyes widen in pure shock. On Tuesday evening, I officially registered an independent cybersecurity auditing firm called Rivera Blackbox. General Vance requires a highly secured, federal-compliant environment, and he trusts me to oversee it. He signed a direct, exclusive oversight contract with my firm 2 nights ago. Sentinel Logistics is my client now, not yours. The chairman stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. He was completely outmaneuvered, trapped in a checkmate he never even saw coming. However, I continued, tapping the folder once with my index finger, Rivera Blackbox is willing to act as an external consulting agency to patch the catastrophic vulnerabilities your vice president created. We will rebuild the physical network bridges and act as the legal liaison to get the government off your back. My consulting fee will be exactly 5 times my previous annual compensation, billed monthly, indefinitely. He opened his mouth to negotiate, but I cut him off instantly. There is one final, non-negotiable contingency in that contract. Bryce Kingston is to be terminated immediately, no golden parachute, no severance package, no transition period. He leaves the building today with absolutely nothing. The chairman looked at the numbers on the paper, his jaw tightening so hard I thought his teeth might crack. He knew he had absolutely zero leverage. Without my federal clearance and my new company acting as the bridge, OmniVantage was completely dead in the water. He pulled a gold-plated pen from his inside breast pocket, leaned over the hood of my classic car, and signed the contract without saying another word. That afternoon, justice was served perfectly cold. Through the encrypted feeds I now legally monitored as their supreme auditor, I watched the security cameras in the main lobby. Bryce Kingston, stripped of his administrative access, his expensive titles, and his unearned arrogance, was escorted out of the glass building by 2 armed security guards. He was carrying a single, small cardboard box containing his desk toys. Nobody cheered, nobody threw confetti. The young developers he had tried to impress simply watched in silence as the architect of their misery was thrown out onto the street. Back in the quiet sanctuary of my home office, I sat down at my heavy wooden desk. I placed my hands on my 10-year-old mechanical keyboard. The heavy, tactile keys felt incredibly grounding under my fingertips. A direct, secure command line interface blinked steadily on my monitor, waiting for my authorization to bring the military defense network back online under my absolute protection. I smiled, a sharp, cold expression of total victory, and pressed the enter key with a satisfying, echoing clack. I had just proved to the entire corporate landscape of America that you should never, ever mess with the seasoned veterans who hold the physical keys to your shiny new digital world. To our absolutely incredible listeners tuning in to Boss Revenge Stories, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for staying with me through this entire journey. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from today. So please drop your city or country in the comments below. If you loved today's story and want to help keep this channel alive, please consider supporting us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon. Over there, you will unlock our absolute best, highly detailed, exclusive true stories that are far too intense for us to publish publicly on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code right here on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link waiting for you in the video description and the pinned comment. Stay safe, stay smart, and we will see you in the next story.